individuals have been arrested by police during a police operation in Bocage. The incident took place on Sunday, 11th September 2022, when officers attached to the Special Services Unit were conducting mobile patrols in the community. Reports suggest that the lawmen had reason to intercept a motor vehicle with 5 occupants on board. One of the occupants subsequently threw a bag out of the window. A search was conducted and a black and a silver JA-9 firearm containing 6 rounds of ammunition was recovered. The 5 occupants are 22-year-old Seidel Christopher of Lakai Denry, 27-year-old Anasis Stephen, 18-year-old Clevy Andrew, and 24-year-old Asana Ogis, all of Bocage Castries. A 15-year-old juvenile was aboard the vehicle at the time and was also arrested. All of the individuals were subsequently charged for possession of firearm and ammunition. They were escorted to the First District Court and granted in the sum of $15,000 on the charge of possession of a firearm and possession of ammunition, the sum of $6,000. They have all been ordered to surrender travel documents along with other conditions. The juvenile in this matter was, however, released to the care and protection of his parents. Reporting for the Hot 7 TV News, I am Jasmine Duncan.
That Jasmine Duncan report taking us into our first edition of Beyond the Headlines. On this program, this edition of the program today, Monday 19th September, we focused on the situation involving our young men on the island as many continue to fall victim to gun violence and criminal activity, becoming statistics by way of either the perpetrators or the victims of gun crime. So we asked the question this morning, how much do our boys matter? Our first guest is already standing by to join the discussion shortly. But it's a Monday morning, and if you're just joining us, we thank you so very much. It's the day after what has been quite a relaxed weekend here on the island. I thought it important, let's just set the tone a bit and catch our mojo before bringing on our first guest on the Beyond the Headlines segment. This past weekend, heavy rains over St. Lucia kept most of us in. So I trust that you're doing well this morning and you're prepared for what lies ahead. The start of a new week, new opportunities and new possibilities. We invite you to put your best foot forward as always. Let's go. You can and you will do this. Over the next few hours, we'll take you over to the French territory of Martinique and Guadeloupe, and then further south to Puerto Rico, where Hurricane Fiona touched ground this past weekend, claiming life and leaving piles of devastation. Our last stop this morning will be in London, England, where mourners are paying their final respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who will be laid to rest today. My first guest joins me in studio, then I have 2 guests joining the platform virtually. One of them includes the one and only Ronald Burr Hinkson. 7 minutes now before 7 o'clock. We'll take a very short commercial break, and I'll bring on my very first guest on Beyond the Headlines, brought to you with the kind compliments of Flow.
Beyond the Headlines is sponsored by Flow.
Why pay full price for your mobile when you can pay half? Just bundle your home internet and mobile services with Flow and save 50% on your mobile bill. That's money in your pockets every month. Plus now you get free YouTube and WhatsApp data. And you can share your plan with up to 3 other numbers. Upgrade now and get a free smartphone. Switch and keep your number. Learn more at discoverflow.co.
So welcome back. We're now into our Beyond the Headlines segment, where we provide review and analysis of matters of national importance in these troubling times when so many of our young men live and die by the gun. Our nation is in search of answers and solutions. On this edition of Beyond the Headlines, we begin a 3-part series to explore the efforts and impact of Our Boys Matter, a proactive and creative program targeting troubled young men in our society. Joining me now live in studio, Dr. Allison Mathurin. Dr. Mathurin, welcome. He's the Executive Director of the Psychosocial Development Fund, SSDF, and also the man who conceptualized the Our Boys Matter program. First of all, welcome to our studios.
Good morning. Good morning to St. Lucians. I want to wish you a good morning this day. I know it looks a little rainy, but hopefully we'll have a good day. And I'm very happy for the opportunity to speak on the Our Boys Matter program. I don't want to take credit for that program. As a matter of fact, let me borrow a line from an old saying that goes, necessity is the mother of invention. And so the OBM program was born out of a resource mobilization effort at the SSDF. What happened was that, recognizing that funds were dwindling from government and internationally as grant funding, I decided that we would go the route of bringing in a resource mobilization officer, so that we could see if we could get the private sector to assist, because our mandate is poverty alleviation. And so I brought on Miss Anya Edwin was the first person that took on that role, and one of the person's early businesses we went to was Massey Stores. And very quickly we were told that if we could develop a program that targeted young men as the most vulnerable group, Soraya was pretty sure that the head office in Trinidad would buy into it. As a matter of fact, in Trinidad there was a program they called Boys to Men. And initially we had called our program that. So we went back to the office, Miss Edwin and myself, and conceptualized this program targeting young boys. And so the idea was that we wanted to see if we brought resources to vulnerable young men, if we brought the educational resources to bear, whether that would be able to mitigate some of the criminality and killings and what have you on the streets. And we immediately sought the assistance of Ms. Fortuna Anthony. Once we had gotten back to Massey and they agreed, that they would go with what we had conceptualized, and so we discussed, and we had Miss Anthony come on board. Of course, Miss Fortuna Anthony is this is really, I call her education guru, and so she came on board, and we decided to design the program. We got great assistance from the Ministry of Education, particularly since we were very happy with that, because we were a little concerned that the Ministry of Education would not buy into the idea of taking boys from the traditional secondary schools and sending them to care, because in the first cohort we targeted 100 boys and about 40 of them went to care. There's a sad reality that while the idea of getting all children to go to secondary school, universal secondary education, the idea is very good. But I think what is lost is that we send a number of children to secondary school, and they're not and they do not have the interest in the theoretical education. And so we found that there are a number of boys that sit in secondary schools, in traditional secondary schools, they have no interest in the academics. They will do a lot better in the absolutely, because that's what they're interested in. And some may be interested in the arts and what have you. Better education system, just sports and you name it. Academia, our education system is strictly focused on academia. Absolutely.
So it's interesting that the Our Boys Matter, the OBM program, recognizes that, and we'll talk about how some of the programs and interventions are designed to cater to the needs of these young men who are not so academically inclined. But when we look at now what's happening with the young boys in particular. We just saw a news report earlier, 5 youngsters arrested in a motor vehicle, all of whom under 28 years old, one 15-year-old minor. Worrying situation. How important and relevant is the OBM in a time like now?
Well, let me say this, a couple of things. If I touch quickly on a few of the pillars. One is transportation. There are a number of children that do not go to school still, notwithstanding the bus subsidies, because they do not have, the parents do not have the money for them to pay to go. Meals. You'd be surprised the number of children that do not go to school because they do not have meals. The parents cannot afford to send them. So you find that these are 2 critical areas. Housing is another critical area, because, of course, persons' housing situations affect their psyche and what have you. But immediately, when we started the OBM, we started with 7 schools in the north as a pilot. Now we across the island, all secondary schools are involved. But we started with the pilot, and what we found immediately was that the attendance increased tremendously. So the idea is this: once you have children, especially young boys, if they're not going to school, what are they doing? And if they're not meaningfully engaged at school, they're not, quite apart from the fact that they, let us assume we give them meals and transportation and what have you, if they are not engaged in school instruction, then they're going to invariably, they're going to drop out of school, and then they become the persons, either those that are victims or those that, and so this is a critical thing. And that is why, as the current Prime Minister said, the Honorable Philip here, he noted that the Our Boys Matter program is a very opportune program, and there is buy-in in both administrations, the prior one and this one. There is buy-in in OBM, and so there's not a whole lot you have to do to sell the program. I think to some extent the SSDF, perhaps because of COVID, because when we first started, we really were on a roll, but perhaps because of COVID, even in the diaspora, because of COVID, we were forced to take a pause. But in terms of selling the OBM program, because it is a program that really can sell itself.
And obviously there's tremendous value in the OBM, but I want to ask you frankly, why are young men continuously finding it more attractive to go down the negative route as opposed to being part of a program like OBM?
Well, a couple of reasons, and I'll say this: there are a number of things happening. If you look at the dynamics in the home, what obtains at home now with the absence of fathers as disciplinary figures, as role models, that's critical, and that is why Massey Stores insisted from the inception that whatever program we developed had to have mentorship. Was the one thing that they insisted that there was. And we can see, I understand we were talking to Boeingson. Well, I mean, Boeingson was really the picture of what a mentor should be and the effect of mentorship on the program. So that is a key component of mentorship. But I'll say this to you: when boys are idle, we live in a world where people see a lot of people. Everybody wants the comforts of life. They want the technology, and they want everything. If you do not educate yourself and give yourself the opportunity to really go out and get a job that can pay you that kind of money, what is the next option? The other thing is, you have persons in some of these inner cities that are actively recruiting these young boys. So that creates, so and as a young boy, you see people living nicely and they have all kind of comforts, and you know how it's acquired, and sometimes the attraction. Parenting is a critical component of this also, and it is for that reason that the SSDF, through the OBM program, has a very strong parenting skills program. Again, that is all parents on the OBM, with children in the OBM program, must participate in the parenting program. Parenting skills is critical. You see, the thing is, we can put as many policemen on the streets as we want, and I'm not saying we do not need the police, but unless these are plasters to band-aids, unless we go down to the root of it, and that's one of the other things the OBM does is the psychosocial support, where we have social officers engage with the families so they can better assess and see what's going on, because sometimes there are other issues going on even in with the children themselves. Sometimes we found that there are some children who are dyslexic, severely dyslexic, and so they do not perform, they're stigmatized, and surprisingly and sadly, even the idea of care is so negatively stigmatized. When that, let's put it this way, care is one of the few schools that graduate children ready for work, and they have over 90% placement in employment rate when the students graduate. We had one of the boys 2 years ago graduated and spoke, and he said he didn't know what would have happened to him if the OBM program was not. And it's so sad that you have institutions like the care that are still discriminated against. Absolutely stigmatized, and people say, I don't want my child to go. I want to give you an example of that. There was a mother that at the entry level school when we went, her child was identified as one of those that should go to care. She insisted no, she didn't want to go. She didn't want to send him. A year later, she came up to me and she asked me if the offer was still there for him to transfer from entry pool to care. And I said, well, why didn't you take it? And then she explained to me that her family was dead set against her son going to care, because for some reason people see care as a reform school, a school for bad behavior. And I must confess, before my own engagement with care and Dr. Mason and her team, I had that perception as well. I was amazed when I first went there and I saw woodwork. I love woodwork. I did it at Castries Comprehensive. And I still do it. They do electricals. And, so when I saw all of that at care, I was shocked, because my concept of care needs to be rebranded.
Absolutely. Let's talk impact now. The OBM, you're in all schools?
Yes, we're in all schools now. Very recently, we included everybody now.
How many young boys and families have you impacted, and what are some of the success stories that you've seen? Well,
what we've done is, when we first started in 2018 or so, we've had 100. So basically, we've had about 100 boys from 2018. Now we're up to about 120, and we're looking to increase that even more now. When we first introduced the schools, especially in the districts, some of them wanted as many as 30-something boys from their school. The fact is, there are a number of boys that need that sort of intervention. And by the way, a number of young ladies also. The reason for OBM now is because Massey stores recognize, and I think a lot of other people recognize, that young males are our most vulnerable group now. So the focus was on boys, but the same resources that are brought to bear on the boys in OBM should be borne girls should have access.
Yeah, because if you don't pay attention to them,
well, absolutely,
very soon they might become the
ladies tend to have a lot of influence on guys too. So that becomes a critical. Let me just say this: when OBM was conceptualized, I realized immediately that it was never going to be sustainable for the SSDF to provide all these needs. So my hope was that the program would serve as a study where we can look at empirical data that would guide the Ministry of Education forward. Because at the end of the day, if we call it OBM or Boys Matter, whatever, the fact is, the reason for the program is because there are a number of children who are not going where they need to go in terms of education, their interest, their aptitude, and in other cases, sometimes together, they do not have the resources to go. So if a child has the resources to go into an area of their interest, and all other things being equal, they have the parenting skills, the support, all of these things in place, then of course that's going to predict their success. Without it, we're always going to be looking for other means to think. And I want to say this, in gratitude to Massey Stores and Select, who were the first sponsors. Both of them came on board and gave us $50,000 each. I want to say also the government of St. Lucia, that's one program at the SSDF, we get exactly what we asked for. So there is clear recognition of that. But I want to thank Lucileka and Massey Stores for setting the pace for the private sector, because it demonstrates what can happen when the private sector comes together with government.
Absolutely.
Stakeholders, if all stakeholders get involved, we can save the lives of these boys and our country, because at the end of the day, all of these killings on the streets, that affects the economy, you know. Because we live in an age of social media where as soon as something happens, it's worldwide. People looking to come to St. Lucia. I don't know if you remember, there was a time when Jamaica, despite its beauty and stuff, there was a time when people were reluctant to go to Jamaica. If you have a lot of killings in a country, nobody wants to go there. We must manage that, and we have to find ways to get our boys to be productive so that they can become the role models for their children. Because we still have too many young men having kids and just abandoning them. That's the norm. You see, so that's another issue we have to deal with.
We've seen the results of the OBM. The boys are attending class more regularly and more frequently. Based on the success trends that you've seen with the program, and I want you to put it against the incidence of criminality involving young men. Who's winning?
I'll answer this by saying this. The reality is, as good a program as OBM is, it is really a drop in the bucket. This answer will be best answered when we can bring the resources that children need to go to school, when we can bring that overwhelmingly to bear. Until then, it will always be a case. Let's face it, 120 boys. Yeah.
So until then, are we failing our young men and
we
our
are
boys?
failing and our girls too. Our education, and it comes from that. So we have the education failing and the home also. So these two components. But clearly we fail in terms of the education because, education is expensive. It's very expensive. But I always say the cost of or the lack of education, it was far more costly. But that is clearly what the issue is in a lot of cases. Our encounter with the boys, first of all, the boys that went to care, they were so excited. One boy in particular had actually dropped out of the secondary school already, but because he was interested, that boy was brought to our attention. He wanted to do technical stuff. He went to care, he graduated, he's working now, and this is what happens. That is why OBM is not a program that just sends children to care. However, we recognize the importance of care, and we recognize that there are a number of secondary schools that do not provide the technical vocational training, which is one of the things that can be addressed quickly. Clearly, there's need for more schools like the Castries Comprehensive and Leon Hess and Beaufort Comprehensive. These technical schools, we have to be able to bring technical vocational schools, build technical vocational schools, because all we're doing is we're sending children to a lot of children, and not everybody's going to be excelling in
academics.
Yes, not everybody will. And so I'll tell you also, and I can tell you from personal experience, when I went to Castries Comprehensive, went through all the technical subjects that I was not interested in. I was the most troublesome child in class. And the academia that I was not interested in, I was the most troublesome. But the ones I was interested in, I was the most focused in class. And from personal experience, I can tell you again, if children are engaged, and we can see examples of that, because the boys that left secondary school and went to care, when you look at their behaviors and stuff at the secondary school, and then you look at it after they had gone to care, while they were there, we'd go and visit, and let me tell you something, the interest level makes a hell of a difference.
Yep.
You see, if
kids aren't interested, they just making numbers and they're just spending time in a classroom, not taking anything
away
when they leave. So it makes a lot of sense that you focus their attention and their attendance in something that has their
interest.
Their interest. Let's move on, because this is a wonderful topic. And if you're just joining us this morning, Monday, we're focusing on a program termed Our Boys at the OBM program, and my very special guest in studio, the Executive Director of the St. Lucia Social Development Fund. Go with me, if you can, a good few years back. We raised our boys, pinning them against the girls. We told them that the girls were the fancier of things and appreciated the nicer things of life, and our boys were the naughty ones who enjoyed the not so good things. From those days of human development, were we setting up our young men for failure and for what we see now? Because we celebrated the girls more than we celebrated the boys.
I will say this, and it's a very good point, but I will say this to you. One of the things that was just cultural, nobody told me, my parents never said to me one day, or any of my brothers, that when you grow up you have to go out and work, and then you have to go to school, go to work, and take care of your family. Nobody said that. But you know what? That was done automatically. I think what is missing, and notwithstanding pitting boys against girls, that didn't prevent us from going out and doing well, and girls from going out and doing well either. I think what is clearly missing today is the absence of a male figure.
I'm agreeing with you, but let's just go back. And my point is, we comforted the young ladies better. We supported them more. We celebrated them more. When a young boy fell, you was told to dust yourself off and get going again. So I'm asking, did the system and our culture not provide boys with that support from inception, from the early days, which now leads to a lot of what we see now?
Well, let's look at this. I mean, the dust yourself off and thing, that has been perennial, really, and that didn't cause boys to go on, turn. And that's why I think I come back to the home, the village, raising the children by a village, and that's the other critical component, because again, my parents were very strict, very, very strict. But when my parents were not home, the neighbors were there. And you see, that is today a lot of us don't know who the neighbors are, and there's not that type of involvement.
Recipe for development.
Absolutely, and I say that all the time. And now we've locked in, all of us, we lock ourselves behind gates and stuff, so you see a neighbor, hi, hello, and that's about it. But even outside of that, if we can find ways, and we have to find ways, and I think, to me, that must be part of the school and education. Education is about learning for life, and we have to teach young men that you cannot just have kids and just leave them and abandon them. And we have to teach young ladies to start looking at how they go about who they have kids with and that sort of thing, because at the end of the day, that is the child you'll end up crying for one day if that child is not properly socialized.
The mentorship program, a key pillar.
Absolutely.
Critical. In the inception, how difficult was it to find good mentors?
Well, the words sound like past tense, but I will say to you, it is very challenging. And Miss Fortuna Anthony spearheaded that. And Miss Fortuna Anthony doesn't give up. She's relentless, but I've seen her efforts. There's something wrong with our males, and I'll tell you why. Because a number of males put their hands up and they say they'll come. You put them through the training and what have you. And I'll say that's the other thing. Women are far more serious than men. I don't know what it is. Women go and get things done, but we, for some reason, we're not.
Opening a can of worms.
I realize that. But you know what needs to be said must be said. Yeah. And I will say this to you: the truth of the matter is that it is very disappointing that that we are struggling to get male mentors. Now, I want to share this with you. Miss Anthony and a few other persons on our OBM team, in the early stages, they were advocating for female mentors. Now, while I recognize that a female can be a mentor, I was resistant to that because I really believe that most of these boys had mothers and they had female figures
what
around.
What was missing
was the father. And so I was resistant. I've almost gotten to the stage where, you know what, whoever can be a mentor, but I'm still hoping that, you know, that men will come forward as they find out more about the program and they'll come, because if you look at the examples of Bo and a few of the other people, I mean, these are the persons you really want as mentors.
Yeah, I suspect it's a matter of having somebody like Boot championing
a voice like that,
and being the face, the poster boy sort of.
Absolutely.
Because from on the onset, we can sit here and we can come up with a decent list of men who could fit the billing of good mentors. But as you say, perhaps the challenge is keeping men to their word and getting men to deliver on what they say they will
getting them to engage. The other thing I want to talk about with regard to the program is what we call alternative pathways, because we also recognize that there are some boys at secondary schools who they just not cut out for the whole structured learning. So for example, whether you put them in a secondary school or care, there are rules and guidelines and uniforms and you know that sometimes, you know, that's a challenge to them. If our focus is really to get these children to be meaningfully employed so they don't have to go that other road, then what we decided to do is, in some cases where we recognize that some of these boys just would not go into sit in a classroom for you know a whole day every day for 5 days a week, and so we look at alternative pathways and programs. At NELU offers a number of programs, even NSDC, and so included in the program would be the option to send some of these boys to these are shorter programs where they can get some of the same skills and they can, you know, be ready to work on what have you.
Excellent. What's needed as we wrap up to sustain the OBM program?
What is needed is funding. Two things. I'm hoping two things I'm hoping for. Until the Ministry of St. Lucia, Ministry of Education, or the St. Lucia government will look at across the board, providing resources to children who need these resources to go to school, because we can say all we want about education being free, even for them to graduate CXCs. You know, there are poor people that cannot pay for CXCs. So until we look as a nation at the education of our young people, not just boys, we will be severely challenged. In the interim, it is for the private sector, and I say this, the private sector has a vested interest in supporting these types of programs, because when news of all these killings and what have you get out, who's affected? It's business. Business is affected.
The entire society. So
absolutely,
you're not getting in a bind from corporate St. Lucia.
Well, I to be fair, I don't want to say that, because as I indicated, COVID,
but Massey has been wonderful.
Massey has been, Lucelec we've been in discussions with Cabot and looks promising. So I think, and as more and more organizations come on, J. Bugas has provided some assistance.
But this program has been on for a while, and the evidence is there. The evidence is there, so don't allow my good friend from SSDF to come back in 6 months' time. We'll call some of you live on the air. We'll call some of you Mr. So-and-so. We're calling from the Our Boys Matter Project, and we'd like a contribution live on the air.
I like that. I like that.
Your vision for the program as we wrap up in the last 30 to 60 seconds.
Yes, my vision, I'll go back again. My vision is for the concept to be adopted by the Ministry of Education, and I know educational resources are very costly, but it is a cost that we must bear. I am convinced that if children, male or female, are given the resources they need and they put in the right environment, they will go on. They will go on to be productive citizens.
The Executive Director of the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, Dr. Allison Mathurin, thank you for coming in. There is so much more that we can discuss, but I'm convinced that Our Boys Matter has an important role to play in us moving forward. We know the mistakes made in the past, the lack of attention given to our boys and our young people in particular. But moving forward, this program is critical. So we thank you for coming in to impart the information to our viewers in the hope that more people will join the brigade of soldiers to see this one making its rightful impact on our society. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to hear that the radio, TV will get involved. That's really good news. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. My very first guest on Beyond the Headlines this hour. Later on this very same topic, I will speak firsthand with one of the beneficiaries. We'll hear his stories, talk to him about how the program impacted him, and later, the one and only Ronald Buhingson will also chip in on the discussion. You want to stay with us? We'll take you over to Martinique and Guadeloupe, where Fiona impacted and caused some destruction. We'll also zoom in on what the storm did on Puerto Rico. And our very last stop this morning will be in London, England, where mourners are paying final respect to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Good morning. Our time is just about 25 minutes after 7 o'clock. This is the morning show built just for you. It's a vibe at sunrise.
Beyond the Headlines is sponsored by Flow.